an interesting situation. That 50-40-10 breakdown is quite interesting. I'm sure the indigenous communities that live in that forest would have a lot to say about that breakdown, and they've already said a lot about how they feel this process is moving along a little too fast, and maybe some decisions are being made before all the final details are being worked out. We're going to dig into that in just a moment, but I'll remind everybody, this is interactive. If you have questions or comments, put them in at the oneclimate.net website. Or you can post them via Twitter using the hashtag OneClimate. My colleague Daniel Nelson is over here monitoring the questions and comments. Danny, what's being said?
I was in Rwanda recently, where the government's very committed to tackling climate change, and in Cameroon, where there seems to be a great deal of corruption in the forestry sector. So I'd be very interested. We've got a very interesting message via oneclimate.net. Thanks very much for sending this in, which says, what is the current position regarding the natural forests being converted to plantations? Is the dispute that happened in Bangkok resolved? Another one's coming. Hold that one for a minute. Better one. More interesting. The presenter mentioned earlier that at the Bali talks, people were wearing T-shirts saying better red than dead. Better dead than red, rather. Are people still this hostile towards red, or has it been improved?
Let me begin by the second question. And I think it relates to what we were saying earlier. If the tenure rights are not clarified, then red is likely to exacerbate inequalities and inequities in the forest areas.
When you say tenure rights?
Who owns what? Okay? So, in countries where you have indigenous communities, and again, I will use the case of Cameroon, where I live, because I know it better. The states own the forest, okay? But the local communities have the right of access to some of the products in the forest. And then the state has set aside, let's say, two systems of forestry. What they call the permanent domain, where the intention is to keep those forests on a permanent basis, and usually that's where logging concessions are given rights of exploitation, because it's assumed they have a management plan that shows how, even though they are cutting down some trees to produce timber, but there are schemes to make sure that the forest as a whole will remain for a long time, if not forever, right? Then we have what we call the non-permanent forest domain, where agricultural activities are allowed to take place. It doesn't mean that it's a license to cut down everything, but it means that communities can cut down a small part of the forest for agricultural purpose, because surely they have to live on something. And then eventually, if the states, through, again, reviewing the situation of the whole forestry sector, believes that part of the non-permanent domain can also be converted to permanent domain. For example, if we manage to intensify agriculture so that we don't rely on extensive agriculture, we use less land to produce equal or if not more food.
Farm smarter.
Exactly. So we can actually expand the forest area. So that is some of the things that go on in Cameroon. And then, for that kind of scheme to succeed, tenure rights have to be clarified, especially if you want to encourage people to plant trees. Do they own that tree? Can they have a claim on whatever payment is being made to have trees around? And in many countries in Central Africa, it's not yet clear. And that's why they are worried about some of the red.
I think that's one of the major concerns, because very briefly, because I'm already getting the wind-up sign, in 10 seconds, as Danny mentioned, there's a lot of corruption in Cameroon and other countries. That's a problem. Who owns the trees has been a problem for hundreds of years. Can that be resolved before these negotiations are finished? Is that even feasible? And if not, are these negotiations moving ahead too fast?
The negotiations, I don't think they are moving ahead too fast, because I actually think we can think of a multi-level process where what comes at the international level can actually act as an incentive for reforms at the national level. I strongly believe in that actually it's a unique opportunity to push along the reforms that are needed, because if these countries are going to subscribe to the new regime that will come on red, obviously what the mechanism that will be provided for in that regime about monitoring, verification, this and that, they will have to revisit the domestic legislation to make sure that it can also reflect those things. And in fact, in Cameroon, they are already engaged in the process of revising the forest law, which came into existence after the Rio conference I mentioned a while ago. And we have now more or less 15 years of experience. We can see what has worked, what hasn't worked well, and what hasn't really worked well mostly relates to the rights of the local communities. It's a big issue, and the government, I must say, they are making efforts to reform the law to take into account all those concerns. And I hope that now that we have this red negotiation, we will also use the opportunity of this revision of the law to also reflect whatever comes out of Copenhagen. So.
Very interesting. Cyrie Sendashonga, Center for International Forestry Research, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.
You're watching OneClimate, live from the Copenhagen summit.
This glacier has been here for